The morning fog clung to the streets of Willow Creek, Oregon, like a soft gray blanket, muffling the usual hum of early risers. Dr. Thomas Reed pushed open the door of his small veterinary clinic, the bell above jingling faintly. At 52, Thomas carried the weight of years in his slightly stooped shoulders, his dark hair now threaded with silver. His hands, steady from decades of mending broken paws and soothing frightened animals, clutched a steaming mug of black coffee. It was a ritual, unlocking the clinic at dawn, breathing in the damp air and letting the quiet settle his mind before the day's bustle began. But this morning, something stopped him cold. There, at the edge of the cracked sidewalk, sat a golden retriever. Motionless, almost statue-like, the dog's golden fur glowed faintly in the mist, catching the first slivers of sunlight. Thomas froze, his mug halfway to his lips. The dog wasn't just still, it was eerily calm, its posture deliberate, as if it had been waiting for him. Those eyes, deep and brown, locked onto his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. They weren't the skittish, wary eyes of a stray. They were knowing, piercing, like they could see straight through the walls he'd built around his heart. Thomas blinked, half expecting the dog to vanish like some trick of the light, but it didn't. It stayed, unblinking, its head tilted just slightly to the right. That tilt, it was like a punch to the gut. He hadn't seen it in 12 years, not since Max, the golden retriever he and his late wife Clara had loved like family, passed away in his arms. Max, with his soft fur and soulful gaze, had been Clara's shadow, her companion through long days of painting and longer nights of illness. When Clara died, Max lingered only a year before his heart gave out, leaving Thomas to bury him under the oak tree on their old farm. The memory stung, sharp and raw even now. "Doc, you okay?" Lily's voice broke through, soft but concerned. His assistant, barely 25, stood in the doorway, her auburn ponytail swinging as she peered out. She followed his gaze to the dog, her brows knitting. "Who's that?" Thomas didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat felt locked, his knees unsteady. He set the mug on the windowsill and stepped forward, the gravel crunching under his boots. Most strays would have bolted by now, or at least flinched, but this dog didn't move. It just watched, its tail still, its eyes never leaving his. The resemblance to Max was uncanny, the same broad muzzle, the same faint white patch above the nose, but this dog's coat was rougher, matted with dust, and its frame carried the stiffness of age. Still, those eyes, they were Max's eyes. "Max!" The name slipped out, a whisper, barely audible over the morning breeze. The dog's ears twitched, and its tail gave a single slow thump against the pavement. Not frantic, not eager, just deliberate, like a nod. Thomas's heart thudded. He sank to one knee, the cold seeping through his jeans, and reached out a trembling hand. The dog didn't pull away. Instead, it leaned forward, just enough for Thomas's fingers to brush its fur. It was coarse, tangled with burrs, but warm. Real. Alive. He hadn't felt this undone in years. Memories flooded back. Clara's laugh as Max chased fireflies in their backyard, the jingle of his collar when Thomas came home from the clinic, the way he'd curl up at Clara's feet while she painted, her brush dancing across the canvas, and then the silence, the unbearable quiet after Max's final breath, when Thomas had sat alone in the empty house wondering how to keep going without them. This couldn't be Max. It was impossible. 12 years, a grave, a lifetime ago. Biology didn't bend that way. And yet here was this dog staring at him like it knew every corner of his soul. "Doc, should I get the scanner?" Lily's voice was gentle, pulling him back. She hovered a few steps away, her hands stuffed in her hoodie pockets, clearly unsure whether to interrupt. Thomas nodded, his eyes still on the dog. "Yeah," he said hoarsely. Let's check if he's chipped." The dog stood as Thomas did, moving with a slow, careful gait that spoke of old joints but steady purpose. It followed him inside without hesitation, its nails clicking softly on the linoleum. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and kibble, a familiar comfort, but today it felt different, charged, like the air before a storm. The dog paused in the waiting room, its gaze flicking to a framed photo on the wall. Clara, smiling, her arms around Max, both of them bathed in summer light. Thomas's chest ached. He'd hung that photo after she passed, a quiet promise to keep her close. Now, it felt like the dog was seeing it too. Lily returned with the handheld scanner, her sneakers squeaking on the floor. "Okay, big guy, let's see who you are," she said, her tone light but her eyes darting to Thomas. She waved the scanner over the dog's shoulder. A soft beep. Her face froze as she read the screen, her mouth parting slightly. "Doc." She turned the scanner toward him. "It says his name is Max. Registered to you." Thomas stared at the glowing display, the words blurring. Max. His Max. The chip number matched the one he'd implanted himself, back when Clara was still alive, when their world was whole. His hands shook as he took the scanner, rereading the data, searching. For a glitch, a mistake, there was none. This dog, this impossible dog, was chipped as Max, tied to him by a digital thread that defied time. "How?" he started, but the words died. The dog, Max, sat back on its haunches, looking up at him with that same steady gaze, as if to say, "I'm here, you'll figure it out." Thomas knelt again, his hands burying in the dog's fur, feeling the warmth, the heartbeat. Tears pricked his eyes, unbidden, and he didn't care that Lily was watching. This wasn't just a dog. This was a piece of his past, a fragment of Clara, a mystery that felt like a gift. Outside, the fog began to lift, sunlight spilling across the sidewalk. Max's tail thumped once more, and Thomas knew whatever this was, it was only the beginning. Thomas Reed sat on the worn stool in the clinic's exam room, the fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead. The golden retriever, Max, if the scanner was to be believed, lay on the stainless steel table, his breathing slow and steady. Those deep brown eyes followed Thomas's every move, calm but expectant, as if waiting for him to catch up to a truth that was already clear to the dog. Lily hovered near the counter, her fingers fidgeting with the scanner, her usual chatter replaced by a nervous silence. The air felt thick with questions neither of them dared voice yet. Thomas ran his hands over Max's coat, checking for injuries out of habit, but his mind was elsewhere. The scanner's display still burned in his memory. Max, registered to Thomas. Reed, chip V4729-381. He'd implanted that chip himself 16 years ago, when Clara had insisted every pet in their care be traceable. "Just in case they wonder," she'd said, her voice soft but firm, her paint-splattered hands ruffling Max's ears. Thomas had buried that chip, along with Max, under the oak tree on their farm 12 years ago. He'd knelt in the dirt. His hands blistered from digging, his heart hollowed out by grief. He'd seen the light leave Max's eyes, felt the stillness settle. There was no mistaking death. And yet, here was this dog, warm and alive, carrying a piece of his past in a way that defied reason. "Doc, you sure you're okay?" Lily's voice was tentative, her green eyes wide with concern. She'd only been with the clinic for 2 years, long enough to know Thomas's quiet stoicism, but not the history that shaped it. "I mean, this is weird, right? Like, really weird." Thomas exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "Weird doesn't cover it." He glanced at Max, who tilted his head slightly, the same way he used to when Clara called him for dinner. The gesture sent a shiver down Thomas's spine. "I buried him, Lily. I held him when he stopped breathing. I put him in the ground myself." Lily bit her lip, glancing at the scanner. Could it be a glitch? Like maybe someone reused the chip or, I don't know, hacked the system? Thomas shook his head. "Not likely. Those chips are unique, and I was the one who registered it. Nobody else had access." He stood pacing the small room, his boots scuffing the linoleum. "This doesn't make sense, none of it does." Max let out a soft huff, almost like a sigh, and shifted to rest his chin on his paws. The movement was so familiar. Max used to do that when Thomas and Clara debated over dinner, as if mildly exasperated by their human nonsense. Thomas stopped pacing, his throat tightening. He wanted to believe it was a coincidence, a look-alike with a fluke chip. But those eyes, that tilt, the way Max seemed to know him, it was like a door to the past had cracked open and he wasn't sure whether to step through or slam it shut. "Let's run it again," Thomas said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Just to be sure." Lily nodded, waving the scanner over Max's shoulder once more. The beep came sharp and final. She turned the screen toward him, her expression a mix of awe and unease. "Same thing, Max. Your name. Same chip number." Thomas stared at the digits, his mind racing. He'd seen thousands of animals in his 42 years as a vet. Dogs, cats, even the occasional ferret or parrot. He'd dealt with mix-ups, lost pets, and grieving owners. But this was something else, something that made the rational part of his brain stutter. He knelt beside Max, searching those eyes for answers. "Who are you, buddy?" he murmured. "Where have you been?" Max's tail gave a slow wag just once, like he was saying, "Does it matter? I'm here now." Thomas's hand rested on the dog's head, the coarse fur grounding him. For a moment, he was back in the old farmhouse, Clara humming in the kitchen, Max sprawled by the hearth, the world whole and unbroken. The memory was so vivid he could almost smell her lavender soap. "Doc, what do we do?" Lily asked, pulling him back. "I mean, he's not hurt, not really, just dehydrated, maybe a little underfed. Should we keep him here? Call someone?" Thomas stood, his knees creaking. "He stays for now. We'll give him a proper exam, some food, water. I need to think." He glanced at the photo of Clara and Max on the wall, their smiles frozen in time. "And don't post anything online yet. No photos, no lost dog notices, not until we know more." Lily nodded, though her brow furrowed. "You think he's someone else's dog?" "I don't know what I think," Thomas admitted. He opened a cabinet, pulling out a bag of kibble and a bowl. As he poured the food, Max slid off the table with a careful grace, his movements stiff but purposeful. He didn't rush the bowl like most hungry strays. Instead, he sat waiting, his gaze fixed on Thomas. It was another echo of the old Max, who'd always waited for permission before eating. Thomas's chest ached as he set the bowl down. "Go on," he said softly. Max dipped his head and ate, each bite slow, almost deliberate. Lily watched, her arms crossed. "He knows you, Doc. That's not random. He walked in here like he owns the place." Thomas didn't respond. He couldn't, because she was right. Max hadn't just wandered in, he'd come home. And that realization, as impossible as it was, stirred something in Thomas he hadn't felt in years. Hope, tangled with fear. If this was Max, or some version of him, what did it mean? Why now? And what was he supposed to do next? As Max finished, eating and curled up on the exam room's old fleece blanket, one Clara had sewn for the clinic years ago, Thomas knew one thing for certain. This dog wasn't here by accident. There was a purpose in those eyes, a story waiting to unfold, and whether he was ready or not, Thomas was part of it. The clock above the clinic's reception desk ticked past midnight, its soft clicks the only sound in the quiet building. Thomas sat in his office chair, the dim glow of a desk lamp casting shadows across the room. Max lay on the fleece blanket in the corner, his breathing slow and rhythmic, his golden fur rising and falling with each breath. The sight should have been comforting, but it kept Thomas awake, his mind churning like a storm-tossed sea. The scanner's confirmation, Max, his Max, chipped and registered to him, had shattered the fragile scaffolding of logic he'd clung. Tess? He needed answers, something tangible to anchor him, and there was only one place he could think to look. He grabbed his keys, the jangle loud in the stillness, and glanced at Max. The dog's eyes opened, steady and alert, as if he'd been waiting. "Stay here, buddy," Thomas said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Max didn't move, but his gaze followed Thomas to the door, calm and unwavering, like he knew exactly where this was headed. The drive to the old farm took 20 minutes. The winding roads of Willow Creek shrouded in darkness. The property, once his and Clara's haven, was now owned by Sarah and Mike Larson, a couple who'd turned it into a small vineyard. Thomas hadn't been back in years, not since he'd sold it, unable to bear the memories that lingered in every corner. The oak tree, though, was still there. He'd seen it from the road once, its branches sprawling like an old friend waving. Him back. That's where he'd buried Max, in a cedar box Clara had painted with sunflowers, under the tree where they'd all spent lazy summer afternoons. The Larsons were kind, and when Thomas had called earlier, explaining in halting words that he needed to check something on the property, Sarah hadn't pressed. "Come by any time," she'd said, her voice warm. "We'll leave the gate unlocked." Now, as Thomas pulled into the gravel drive, his truck's headlights swept over the familiar landscape. Rows of grapevines, the barn's weathered red paint, and there, at the edge of the field, the oak tree, its silhouette stark against the starry sky. He grabbed a shovel from the truck bed, his breath clouding in the chilly air. Max had stayed at the clinic, but Thomas felt his presence, as if those brown eyes were watching from miles away. The ground. Beneath the oak was soft, still damp from recent rain, and Thomas hesitated, the shovel's handle cold in his hands. Digging up a grave felt like betraying a promise, but he had to know. He had to see. The first scoop of earth was heavy, the smell of wet soil sharp and grounding. He worked carefully, methodically, his heart pounding with each turn of the shovel. Memories flickered, Clara's hand in his as they lowered the box, Max's collar tucked inside, the way the sun had set behind the tree that day, painting the sky in hues of gold and grief. He'd sobbed then, alone, the weight of losing both. Clara and Max crushing him. Now, as he dug deeper, he braced for the cedar box for proof that his mind wasn't playing tricks. But at 2 feet down, there was nothing. No box, no collar, no trace of the grave he'd so carefully made. Just empty earth, undisturbed except for his own digging. Thomas dropped the shovel, his knees buckling as he sank to the ground. His hands, caked with dirt, trembled as he stared into the hollow space. "This can't be," he whispered, his voice swallowed by the night. He sat there, the cold seeping through his jacket, trying to piece it together. Had he misremembered the spot? No. He knew this tree, this exact patch of ground, as well as... He knew his own name. Had someone taken the box? Unlikely. The Larsons would have noticed, and who would disturb a pet's grave? The alternative, that Max had never been buried here, that the dog at the clinic was truly him, felt like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. A rustle in the vines made him turn. Sarah Larson stood a few yards away, a flashlight in hand, her coat thrown over pajamas. "Thomas, you okay out here?" Her voice was gentle, her grey hair catching the light. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees, his face hot despite the chill. I don't know, Sarah. I was looking for something. Max's grave, my dog. I buried him here, but..." He gestured at the empty hole, words failing him. Sarah stepped closer, her flashlight illuminating the disturbed earth. "You? Sure this is the spot?" "Positive," he said, his voice cracking. "Right under the oak where Clara and I always sat." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "We've never touched this area. Mike mows around it, out of respect, but..." She hesitated, then met his eyes. "There's been talk in town, you know, about that dog at your clinic. People say he looks like Max, like he came back." Thomas's throat tightened. "It's impossible. I watched him die." Sarah's smile was small, kind. "Maybe. But I've lived long enough to know some things don't need explaining. They just need you to listen." He didn't know how to respond. The hole gaped like a question mark, and Sarah's words echoed in his head as he drove back to the clinic, the shovel rattling in the truck bed. When he stepped inside, Max was still on the blanket, but he stood as Thomas entered, his tail giving a single slow wag. Those eyes so steady seemed to say, "You're starting to see." Thomas sank to the floor beside him, his hands resting on Max's head. "What are you trying to tell me?" he whispered. Max leaned into him, warm and solid, and for the first time in years, Thomas felt a flicker of something beyond grief, a purpose, a mystery, a chance to heal. Whatever Max was, whatever this meant, he wasn't here by accident, and Thomas was ready to find out why. The sun rose over Willow Creek, painting the clinic's windows with a soft pink glow. Thomas hadn't slept, his mind tangled in the mystery of the empty grave and the dog now curled on the fleece blanket in the exam room. Max's presence was a quiet anchor, his steady breathing a contrast to the storm of questions swirling in Thomas's head. He sipped lukewarm coffee, staring at the photo of Clara and Max on the wall, their smiles a reminder of a life that felt both distant and achingly close. The bell above the clinic door jingled, signaling Lily's arrival, her sneakers squeaking, as she bustled in with a box of donuts. "Morning, Doc," she said, setting the box on the counter. Her eyes flicked to Max, who lifted his head, ears perked. "How's our mystery guest doing?" "Same as last night," Thomas said, managing a faint smile. "Calm. Too calm." He rubbed his eyes, the weight of the sleepless night settling in his bones. "I went to the farm, the grave, and it's empty, nothing there." Lily's mouth parted, her hand pausing mid-reach for a donut. "Empty? Like gone? How does that even happen?" "I don't know," Thomas admitted, "but he's here and he's real, and I need to figure out why." Max stood, stretching with a slow, deliberate grace, and padded to Thomas's side. He nudged Thomas's hand, his nose warm and insistent, just like he used to when Clara was late with breakfast. The familiarity sent a pang through Thomas's chest, but it also sparked something, a determination to understand, to follow whatever path Max was laying out. The morning passed in a blur of routine, vaccinations for a litter of kittens, a check-up for an elderly dachshund, but Thomas's attention kept drifting to Max. The dog stayed close, lying by the reception desk, his eyes tracking every movement with a quiet intensity. Around noon, as Lily swept the waiting room, Max's ears twitched. He stood abruptly, his gaze fixed on the front door. Before Thomas could react, Max slipped outside, the bell jingling as the door swung shut behind him. "Doc!" Lily called, dropping the broom. Thomas was already moving, his heart racing as he stepped onto the sidewalk. Max was halfway down the street, his gait steady but purposeful, heading toward the edge of town. Thomas followed, his boots pounding the pavement, a mix of worry and curiosity driving him. Max didn't look back, weaving through the quiet streets until he reached a narrow alley behind the old hardware store. There, crouched in the shadow of a dumpster, was a beagle, its ribs stark against its matted brown and white coat. The dog's eyes were wide with fear, one hind leg dragging as it tried to shrink away. Max stopped a few feet from it, sitting calmly, his tail still. He let out a soft, low whine, not threatening but coaxing like a friend offering a hand. The beagle's trembling eased slightly, its nose twitching as it studied Max. Thomas approached slowly, his voice gentle. "Easy there. We're not gonna hurt you." He knelt, keeping his distance, and glanced at Max. "You brought me here, didn't you?" Max's eyes met his, steady and sure, as if to say, "This is why." Thomas's throat tightened. He'd seen strays before, hundreds in his career, but this felt different. Max hadn't just found a dog, he'd led Thomas to one that needed him, with a precision that felt almost deliberate. Lily caught up, panting, a leash in hand. Did he find that dog?" "Looks like it," Thomas said, his voice low. He coaxed the beagle closer with a piece of jerky from his pocket, earning a hesitant sniff. After a few minutes, the beagle let Thomas slip the leash on, its limp more pronounced as it hobbled forward. Max stood, nudging the beagle gently, guiding it toward the clinic like a shepherd with a lost lamb. Back at the clinic, Thomas examined the beagle, a female with a sprained leg and signs of malnutrition, but no serious injuries. He cleaned her wounds, bandaged her leg, and set out a bowl of food which she devoured. Max watched from the corner, his posture relaxed but attentive, as if his job was done for now. Lily, brushing burrs from the beagle's coat, named her, Sadie on the spot. "She's a fighter," Lily said, grinning, "like someone else we know." Thomas nodded, his gaze on Max. He knew where to go, didn't hesitate. Lily's eyes sparkled. "You think he's like on a mission or something?" "Maybe," Thomas said, the word heavy with possibility. He thought of Clara, how she'd always believed animals had a way of teaching humans what mattered most. Maybe he's trying to show us something. By evening, Sadie was resting comfortably in a kennel, her tail wagging faintly when Lily checked on her. Word of Max's rescue spread quickly. Lily couldn't resist telling a client who told her sister, who mentioned it at the diner. By the next morning, A few townsfolk stopped by, curious about the miracle dog who'd appeared out of nowhere. Thomas overheard whispers at the coffee shop. Some called it a fluke, others a sign. He didn't care for the speculation, but he couldn't deny the shift in himself. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of purpose, a reason to look forward instead of back. That afternoon, a young couple came to the clinic, drawn by the gossip. They met Sadie, and within an hour they'd filled out adoption papers, promising her a home with a big yard and a toddler to chase. As they left, Sadie's leash in hand, Thomas watched Max. The dog sat by the window, his eyes following Sadie's departure, a quiet satisfaction in his gaze. Thomas knelt beside him, his hand resting on Max's head. "You're not just here for me, are you?" he murmured. "You've got work to do." Max's tail thumped once, and Thomas felt a warmth spread through him, like sunlight breaking through fog. Whatever Max was, ghost, miracle, or something else entirely, he was leading Thomas somewhere. And Thomas, for the first time in a long time, was ready to follow. The late afternoon sun dipped low over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the clinic's gravel lot. Thomas leaned against the counter, scribbling notes from a routine checkup, while Max dozed by the reception desk, his golden fur catching the light. The past week had been a whirlwind. Sadie's rescue, her quick adoption, and the town's growing fascination with Max had kept the clinic buzzing. Thomas felt a quiet rhythm returning to his days, a sense of purpose he hadn't known since Clara's laughter filled their home. But as the bell above the door jingled, that rhythm faltered. A man stepped inside, his boots scuffing the linoleum. He was tall and wiry, in his late 60s with wind-roughened skin and a faded flannel shirt tucked into jeans. His grey hair was tucked under a worn baseball cap, and his hands, calloused and unsteady, clutched a phone. Max's head snapped. Up, ears perked, and he stood, letting out a low, eager whine. The sound stopped Thomas mid-sentence, his pen hovering over the chart. Max didn't whine for strangers, not even for the curious locals who'd been dropping by. "Can I help you?" Thomas asked, setting the pen down. His voice was steady, but his pulse quickened as Max padded toward the man, tail swaying in slow, deliberate arcs. The man didn't answer right away. His eyes, sharp and blue, locked onto Max, and for a moment he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He knelt, his knees creaking, and Max pressed his head into the man's chest, nuzzling, with a familiarity that made Thomas's stomach twist. The man's hand rested on Max's fur, trembling slightly, and when he spoke his voice was rough, barely above a whisper. I think you've got my dog." Thomas's breath caught. Lily, who'd been restocking bandages in the back, poked her head out, her eyes wide. "Your dog?" she asked, stepping into the room. Max glanced between the man and Thomas, his expression calm but alert, as if he understood the weight of the moment. The man stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Name's Harold Tate. Folks call me Harold." He extended a hand, and Thomas shook it, noting the firm grip despite the shake. "I'm from up near Emmett, Idaho, about 3 hours north. Saw a picture of this dog on your clinic's Facebook page. Thought I was losing my mind." Thomas's mind raced. Lily had posted a photo of Max a few days ago, despite his request to keep things quiet, hoping to find any leads on his origins. He'd meant to ask her to take it down, but the clinic's chaos had distracted him. Now, here was this stranger, claiming Max as his own. "What's his name?" Thomas asked, his voice tighter than he intended. Harold's gaze softened as he looked at Max. "Rusty. Found him 6 years ago, wandering near my farm. No collar, no chip, just skin and bones. Took him in, and he's been with me ever since." He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a photo, a golden retriever, unmistakably Max, lying on a porch with a red barn in the background. "This is him last summer." Thomas stared at the image, his chest tightening. The dog in the photo had the same white patch above the nose, the same soulful eyes. But the chip said Max, registered to him. "There's a chip," Thomas said, crossing his arms. "We scanned him. Says his name's Max, registered to me. I buried my dog Max 12 years ago." Harold's eyebrows shot up, his hand pausing on Max's head. "Buried him?" He let out a low whistle, shaking his head. That's Something else. I swear I never saw a chip. Had him checked at the vet in Emmett. Nothing came up. Lily stepped closer, her voice cautious. Maybe the scanner missed it, or I don't know, maybe it's a different dog. Thomas shook his head. We triple-checked. Same chip number I put in myself. He looked at Max, who sat between them, his tail swaying gently, showing no sign of confusion or conflict. It was as if Max belonged to both of them, content in this impossible overlap of lives. Harold rubbed his chin, his eyes searching Max's face. I believe you, Doc. I ain't here to cause trouble. But this dog, he's been my shadow. Saved. Me, in a way, after I lost my wife. Just me and him on that farm, keeping each other going. His voice cracked and he looked away, clearing his throat. Thomas's heart softened. He knew that kind of loss, the kind that left you hollow, clinging to whatever kept you tethered to the world. He saw it in Harold's eyes, the same grief he'd carried since Clara's death. I believe you too, he said quietly. I don't think you stole him. I don't think anyone did, but something's going on here, something bigger. Max let out a soft huff, nudging Harold's hand, then turning to rest his head against Thomas's leg. The gesture was a bridge connecting two men who'd never met but shared a bond through this dog. Thomas knelt, meeting Max's gaze. You're tying us together, aren't you? He murmured. Max's tail thumped once, as if in agreement. Harold watched, his expression softening. What do we do then? I can't just leave him. Thomas stood, a decision forming. We don't have to choose. Not yet. Let's share him. You come by, we'll work it out. He seems to need us both. It felt strange, offering to share a dog that was both his and not his, but it also felt right, like following Max's lead. Harold nodded slowly, a faint smile breaking through. Fair enough, Doc. I can do that. As Harold left, promising to return in a few days, Max settled back on his blanket, his eyes half closed but watchful. Thomas felt a shift, like a door opening wider. Max wasn't just here to heal him. He was weaving lives together, mending broken pieces in ways Thomas couldn't yet grasp. And whatever came next, Thomas knew Max would show him the way. The days following Harold's visit settled into a new rhythm at the Willow Creek Veterinary Clinic, one shaped by Max's quiet but undeniable presence. Thomas woke each morning to find Max waiting by the front door, his golden fur catching the dawn light, those soulful eyes fixed on the world beyond. The dog's routine was unpredictable yet purposeful. Hours spent in the clinic, dozing by the reception desk or trailing Thomas during exams, followed by sudden departures into town. Each time Max slipped out, Thomas felt a mix of worry and anticipation, knowing the dog would return with a purpose. It started small. A few days after Sadie's rescue, Max vanished for an afternoon, returning with a shivering terrier, its black and tan coat matted with mud. The dog, skittish but unharmed, cowered behind Max as they entered the clinic. Thomas and Lily cleaned it up, treated a few scrapes, and named it Tinker. Within 2 days, a retired teacher adopted Tinker, charmed by its timid wags. The pattern, repeated. A blind collie with cloudy eyes, led gently by Max through the clinic door, a kitten tangled in briars, mewling softly as Max nudged it toward safety. Each animal arrived in need, and each left transformed, finding homes with families. Touched by Max's story, Thomas watched it unfold with a growing sense of awe. Max didn't just find strays, he sought them out with a precision that felt almost supernatural. He'd disappear into the woods or alleys, returning hours later with a new charge, his gait slow but determined, his eyes bright with purpose. The clinic became a haven, its kennels rarely empty, its walls echoing with the soft thumps of wagging tails. Lily dubbed it Max's Haven, a name that stuck as locals began dropping by with donations, bags of kibble, old blankets, even a hand-knitted sweater for the kitten, now called Briar. The town was changing too. At the diner, Thomas overheard regulars talking about Max, their voices hushed with wonder. He found that collie in the ravine, one said. Nobody else would have looked there. A hardware store clerk left a water bowl outside, etched with, "For Max's Friends." Kids drew pictures of a golden retriever with a halo, taping them to the clinic's windows. Thomas, who'd spent years keeping the world at arm's length, found himself at the center of it all, fielding questions and accepting thanks he wasn't sure he deserved. Harold became a regular, driving down from Idaho every few days to spend time with Max. He'd sit on the clinic's porch, sipping coffee from a thermos, Max's head resting on his knee. "He's got a job, don't he?" Harold said one evening, his voice low as they watched Max nap, like he's making up for lost time. Thomas nodded, his hands wrapped around a mug. "I think he's been doing this for a while, before he came back to me. Maybe even before. I have found him." The thought had been growing, a quiet certainty that Max's journey spanned more than their individual lives. Harold's eyes, lined with years of solitude, met his, and for a moment they shared an unspoken understanding. Max was more than a dog. He was a bridge, a guide, a force of healing. But Thomas noticed something else. Max was tiring. His steps were heavier, his naps longer. The stiffness in his joints was more pronounced, and sometimes, after a rescue, he'd collapse onto his blanket, breathing heavily, as if each mission drew from a finite well. Thomas checked him daily, heart, lungs, joints, finding no major issues, just the wear of age. "You're not young anymore, are you?" he murmured one night, running his hands over Max's fur. Max's tail thumped, but his eyes held a quiet resolve, as if to say, "I've got more to do." The rescues grew more frequent, each one tugging at Thomas's heart. A lab mix, half-starved, its ribs sharp under matted fur. A parrot, squawking from a crate abandoned by the river, led to safety by Max's steady presence. Each arrival brought new stories, new faces. A single mother adopted the lab, her kids, giggling as it chased a ball. A librarian took the parrot, naming it Poe. The clinic's donation box overflowed, stuffed with cash, notes, and dog treats. One note, scrawled in a child's hand, read, "Max is a hero. Thank you for helping him help dogs." Lily, ever the optimist, started a binder for the stories, pasting in photos and letters. "He's changing everything, Doc," she said, taping a picture of Max with the lab mix to the wall. "Not just for the animals, but for us. For the town." Thomas couldn't argue. He felt it too, a warmth spreading through the hollow spaces Clara's death had left. Max's missions were pulling him out of isolation, forcing him to see the world again. He caught himself smiling at clients, lingering over coffee with Harold, even laughing when Lily teased him about his terrible handwriting. But beneath it, all was a quiet fear. Max was giving everything, and Thomas wasn't sure how much he had left. One rainy afternoon, as Thomas bandaged a stray's paw, Max stood at the door, his ears twitching. Thomas knew the look. "Again?" he asked, half expecting Max to stay put, given the downpour. But Max pushed the door open and stepped into the rain, his golden coat darkening as he headed toward the woods. Thomas grabbed his jacket, ready to follow, but Lily stopped him. "Let him go, Doc. He knows what he's doing." Hours later, Max returned, soaked and limping slightly, guiding a tiny poodle, its white fur caked with mud. The poodle trembled but stayed close to Max, trusting his lead. Thomas knelt, scooping the dog into a towel, his eyes meeting Max's. "You're gonna wear yourself out," he said softly. Max's tail wagged once, weary but proud, and Thomas felt a surge of gratitude for this dog, this mystery, this chance to be part of something bigger. As Max curled up to rest, Thomas knew the rescues were just the beginning. Max was building something, a legacy, a community, a way forward. And Thomas, for the first time in years, was ready to see where it led. The early autumn air in Willow Creek carried a crisp edge, the kind that hinted at falling leaves and shorter days. Thomas stood outside the clinic, tossing a tennis ball for Max, who chased it with a slower but still eager gait. The Golden Retriever's rescues had become a town fixture, strays of every kind, from scrappy mutts to a half-feral cat with one ear, all led to the clinic's door by Max's steady guidance. The community had rallied around Max's haven, leaving food, blankets, and notes of gratitude in a wooden box by the gate. Thomas felt a quiet pride watching Max work, but also a growing unease. The dog's energy was waning, his fur grayer at the muzzle, and Thomas wondered how long Max could keep going. It was late afternoon when Max's ears perked, his body tensing as he stared down the street. Thomas, cleaning a kennel, noticed the shift. "What is it, buddy?" he asked, but Max was already moving, slipping through the gate with a purpose that brooked no delay. Thomas grabbed his jacket, calling to Lily, who was restocking supplies. "He's off again, I'm following." The trail led past the diner and into the town's small park, where maples glowed red against the gray sky. Max didn't waver, his nose low, weaving through picnic tables and empty swings. Thomas jogged to keep up, his breath puffing in the cool air. At the park's edge, where a dirt path dipped into a wooded ravine, Max stopped. There, huddled against a tree, was a teenage girl, her knees drawn to her chest. Her hoodie was soaked, her dark hair plastered to her face, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. A backpack, torn at one strap, lay beside her. Max approached slowly, his tail low but wagging gently. He let out a soft whine, not startling but comforting, and sat a few feet away, his eyes fixed on the girl. She looked up, startled, her tear-streaked, face pale in the fading light. "Go away," she mumbled, but her voice lacked conviction. Max didn't move, just tilted his head, his gaze steady and kind. Thomas stepped forward, keeping his distance. "Hey," he said softly, crouching to seem less imposing. "You okay? I'm Thomas from the vet clinic. This is Max. He finds people who need help." The girl's eyes flicked to Max, then back to Thomas, wary but curious. "He's not mine," she said, wiping her nose. "I don't know him." "I know," Thomas said, "but he knows you." "Mind if I sit?" She shrugged, and he settled on the damp ground, leaving space between them. Max inched closer to the girl, lying, down with a soft huff, his warmth radiating. She hesitated, then reached out, her fingers brushing his fur. Max leaned into her touch, and her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Her name was Mia," she said after a long silence. "She was 16, from a few streets over. She'd run away after a fight with her stepdad. Not a violent one, but loud, the kind that made her feel invisible. I just needed to be somewhere else," she whispered, her hand still on Max. "I didn't know where to go. He just showed up. Sat with me. I wasn't so scared anymore." Thomas's heart ached. He knew that kind of loneliness, the kind that made the world feel too big and too small all at once. "Max has a way of finding people," he said. "He's been doing it a lot lately. Animals, mostly. You're the first person." Mia's lips twitched, almost a smile. "He's special, huh?" "Yeah," Thomas said, meeting Max's eyes. "He is." He convinced Mia to come to the clinic, promising no questions, just a warm place to sit. Max walked beside her, his presence a quiet reassurance. At the clinic, Lily made hot cocoa, her chatter filling the silence as Mia sipped from a chipped mug. Thomas called the sheriff, who knew Mia's family. Her mother arrived within the hour, tears streaming as she hugged Mia tightly. "I was so worried," she whispered. Mia clung to her, then turned to Max, kneeling to bury her face in his fur. "Thank you," she murmured. As they left, Mia's mother squeezed Thomas's hand. "I don't know how he found her, but I'll never forget it." Thomas nodded, but the thanks felt misplaced. It was Max, always Max. Word of Mia's rescue spread like wildfire. By morning, the diner was abuzz with talk of the miracle dog, who didn't just save strays but lost kids too. A local reporter stopped by, notepad in hand, and though Thomas waved her off, Lily eagerly shared the story. The clinic's phone rang with calls from neighbors, some offering help, others just wanting to see Max. A kid left a crayon drawing of Max with a cape taped to the donation box. Harold arrived that evening, his truck rattling into the lot. He sat with Thomas on the porch, Max between them, and listened as Thomas recounted Mia's rescue. "He's not just patching up dogs, is he?" Harold said, his voice low. "He's fixing people too." Thomas nodded, his gaze on Max. "I think he's doing what Clara always did, seeing the ones who feel invisible." He thought of Clara's paintings, how she'd capture the quiet beauty in overlooked things, a bent flower, a cracked fence, a stray's hopeful eyes. Max was carrying that forward, and in doing so he was healing Thomas too. But as Max curled up to sleep, his breathing heavier than usual, Thomas felt a pang of worry. The dog was giving everything, his strength, his heart, and Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. Max's mission was growing, but so was the cost. Still, those eyes, so steady and sure, told Thomas to keep following, to trust the path ahead. October's chill settled over Willow Creek, frosting the clinic's windows and turning the maples along Main Street into bursts of crimson and gold. Max's rescues had woven themselves into the town's heartbeat. Strays found homes, stories of his quiet heroism spread, and the donation box by the clinic gate brimmed with notes, treats, and knitted scarves for the animals. Thomas felt a warmth he hadn't known since Clara's days, a sense that Max was not just saving others, but pulling him back to life. Yet the golden retriever's slower steps and longer naps gnawed at Thomas's heart, a reminder that Max's time was finite, even if his purpose seemed boundless. It was a foggy Tuesday morning when Max returned from one of his outings, his fur damp and speckled with leaves. He moved slower than usual, his limp more pronounced, but his eyes were bright, fixed on the scruffy spaniel trailing behind him. The dog, a wiry mix of brown and black, had a matted coat and a wary stance, but it stayed close to Max, trusting his lead. A worn leather collar hung around its neck, half hidden by fur, and something about it caught Thomas's eye, a small folded piece of paper tucked beneath the buckle. "Another one, huh?" Lily said, grabbing a towel as she joined Thomas outside. She knelt to greet the spaniel, who shied away until Max nudged it gently as if to say, "They're safe." Thomas crouched beside the spaniel, his fingers brushing the collar. The paper was yellowed, its edges frayed, and he carefully unfolded it, his pulse quickening. In faded ink, written in a looping script, were the words, "She was my light." "Keep her safe." Below a signature, Elliot. Thomas's breath hitched. Elliot was Clara's maiden name, the one she'd used for her early paintings before they married. "Doc, you okay?" Lily asked, peering over his shoulder. "What's it say?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He stared at the note, his hands trembling. Clara had loved spaniels. Her first dog, a puppy she'd named Dandelion, had been one given to a friend when Clara's illness worsened. Thomas had almost forgotten, the memory buried under years of grief. He looked at the spaniel whose dark eyes met his with a quiet wisdom, and then at Max, who sat calmly, his tail still, as if he'd delivered exactly what he intended. "Let's get her inside," Thomas said, his voice rough. He carried the spaniel, whom Lily dubbed Hazel, into the exam room, checking her for injuries. She was underfed, with a few ticks and a slight limp, but otherwise healthy. Max stayed close, lying by the table, his gaze never leaving Hazel. Thomas's mind raced, the note burning in his pocket. Was it coincidence, a prank, or something more, something tied to Clara, to Max, to the impossible thread connecting them all? That evening, after Hazel was settled with food and a warm bed, Thomas retreated to the clinic's upstairs apartment, a small space he'd lived in since selling the farm. Max followed, curling up by the armchair as Thomas pulled out Clara's old photo albums, dust coating their covers. He hadn't opened them in years, the pain too sharp, but now he needed answers. Flipping through pages of their life, wedding photos, beach trips, Clara's art shows, he stopped at a faded picture. Clara, maybe 25, laughing on a porch, a spaniel puppy in her arms. Dandelion. The same long ears, the same soulful eyes as Hazel. The caption in Clara's handwriting read, "Dandy my light, summer 98. Thomas's heart pounded. He looked at Max, whose ears twitched as if sensing the discovery. "You found her," he whispered. "You brought her back." The note's words echoed. She was my light. And Thomas realized Hazel wasn't just a stray. She was a piece of Clara's past, a link to the woman who taught him to love deeply, fiercely. But how? Dandelion would be ancient by now, or gone. Yet here was Hazel, carrying Clara's signature, led by Max to his door. He called Harold, who arrived the next morning, his truck crunching into the lot. Thomas showed him the note and the photo, his voice unsteady as he explained. Harold read the note twice, his fingers tracing the ink. You're sure that's her name? Elliot? Positive, Thomas said. She stopped using it after we married, but it's hers. I'd know her handwriting anywhere. Harold leaned back, rubbing his chin. This dog of ours, he's not just finding strays, is he? He's digging up memories, tying loose ends. He looked at Max, who lay beside Hazel, now bathed and resting. You think Clara sent him? Thomas swallowed, the question too big to answer. I think he's doing what she would have done, finding the ones who need us. He thought of Clara's paintings, how they always captured the overlooked, a bent tree, a lone bird, a dog's hopeful gaze. Max was painting in his own way with rescues and connections, and Hazel was part of that canvas. The town caught wind of Hazel's story, though Thomas kept the note private. Locals stopped by to meet her, drawn by Max's growing legend. A young artist adopted Hazel, charmed by her gentle spirit, promising to paint her portrait. As she left, Thomas tucked the note into his wallet, a quiet talisman. Max watched her go, his tail wagging once, then settled onto his blanket, his breathing heavier than before. That night Thomas sat by Max, his hand resting on the dog's head. You're bringing her back to me, aren't you? He murmured, piece by piece. Max's eyes met his, steady and knowing, and Thomas felt a surge of gratitude for this dog, this miracle, this chance to heal. But he also felt the weight of Max's tiring body, the cost of each rescue. Whatever Max was building, it was bigger than Thomas had imagined, and he knew the next step would reveal even more. November swept into Willow Creek with a gentle flurry of leaves, blanketing the streets in hues of amber and rust. The clinic, now known as Max's Haven, hummed with a new energy, its walls adorned with photos of rescued animals and crayon drawings from local kids. Max's missions had become the town's heartbeat. Each stray he led to the clinic, each story of hope wove the community tighter. Thomas felt it in the smiles of clients, the extra chairs at the diner where he lingered with Harold, and the way his own heart, once heavy with grief, beat lighter. But Max's slower steps and greying muzzle were a quiet reminder that his time was precious, urging Thomas to cherish every moment of this unfolding miracle. The transformation began subtly. After Mia's rescue and Hazel's arrival with Clara's note, Willow Creek seemed to wake up. Neighbors who'd once nodded politely now stopped to chat, sharing stories of Max's latest find, a scrawny tabby, a limping hound, even a goose, waddling behind him through the park. The donation box by the clinic gate overflowed, not just with food and blankets, but with notes of gratitude. Max found our cat last week. We thought she was gone forever. Thank you for giving strays a home. Lily, with her boundless enthusiasm, turned the notes into a scrapbook, its pages growing thicker by the day. Local businesses joined in. The bakery left out biscuits labeled Max's Treats, free for any dog passing by. The hardware store set up a Max's Fund jar, collecting coins for the clinic's supplies. At the elementary school, kids launched a kindness project, writing letters to Max and drawing him as a superhero, his golden fur glowing under a cape. One drawing, taped to the clinic's window, showed Max leading a line of animals and people with the caption, "Max shows us how to care." Thomas read it one morning, his throat tightening, and realized Max wasn't just saving strays. He was teaching the town to see each other. The clinic became a gathering place. Strangers dropped by to meet Max, some with pets, others just curious. A retired firefighter, his voice gruff, shared how Max's story pulled him through a dark winter after losing his wife. "That dog's got a spark," he said, petting Max's head. "Makes you want to keep going." A single mother adopting a rescued mutt hugged Thomas, tears in her eyes. "My kids haven't smiled like this in months." Each visit left Thomas humbled, the clinic's small waiting room feeling like a chapel of second chances. Harold, now a fixture, helped organize the chaos. He built a wooden stand for the donation box carved with paw prints and started sorting the notes into plastic sleeves. "Gotta keep this history straight," he'd say, his grin crinkling his eyes. He and Thomas spent evenings on the porch, Max between them, swapping stories of their lives. Harold's farm, Clara's paintings. The way Max seemed to belong to both, yet neither. "He's not just ours," Harold said one night, staring at the stars. "He's everybody's now." Max's rescues continued, though his pace slowed. He'd slip out at dawn, returning with a shivering pup or a cat with a torn ear, his limp more noticeable but his purpose unshaken. Thomas and Lily nursed each one, finding homes faster than they could have imagined. The town's shelter, once overcrowded, began to empty, as Max's story inspired adoptions. A local couple, moved by Hazel's tale, took in 2 strays, naming them after Clara's favorite flowers. The ripple effect was undeniable. Max was changing lives, one rescue at a time. One chilly morning, the mayor stopped by with a proposal. "We want to name the park trail after him," she said, her scarf fluttering in the wind. "Max's trail, for everything he's done." Thomas hesitated, unsure about the spotlight, but Lily beamed, already planning a ceremony. The town council agreed, and a small plaque was ordered. Max's trail, the path back home. Thomas felt a swell of pride, mixed with worry. Max, resting by the heater, looked thinner, his breathing labored after a long trek. "For you're carrying a lot, aren't you?" Thomas murmured, stroking his fur. Max's tail thumped as if to say it's worth it. The community's transformation peaked at a Saturday event, organized by Lily. Folding tables lined the clinic's lot, laden with lemonade, cookies, and dog toys. Locals brought casseroles, kids ran with rescued pups, and a guitarist played soft folk tunes. The crowd, bigger than Thomas expected, shared stories of Max's impact. A teacher donated school supplies for families in need, inspired by Max's kindness. A boy no older than 10 gave Thomas a handmade card. "Max is my hero, I want to help animals too." Thomas tucked it into the scrapbook, his eyes stinging. As the sun set, Max sat by Thomas, his head high despite his fatigue. The crowd clapped. For him, a few snapping photos. Max didn't flinch, just blinked slowly, as if accepting the love but unmoved by the fuss. Harold, sipping cider, leaned close. "He's made us better, Doc. All of us." Thomas nodded, his hand on Max's head. "He's showing us what Clara always saw, the good in people waiting to come out." He thought of her paintings, how they found beauty in the broken, and saw Max doing the same, stitching the town together with every rescue. But as Max curled up that night, his breathing shallow, Thomas's heart clenched. The dog's mission was growing, but his strength was fading. Whatever Max was building, a legacy, a lesson, Thomas knew it was far from over, and the next piece would change everything. Winter's first breath whispered through Willow Creek, dusting the clinic's roof with frost and turning the breath of early risers into fleeting clouds. Max's haven had become a beacon, its porch light a signal of hope for strays and souls alike. Thomas felt the town's transformation in every handshake, every note left in the donation box, every child's drawing of Max pinned to the clinic walls. The Golden Retriever's rescues, animals, people, even moments of kindness, had knit Willow Creek into a tapestry of care, with Max as its quiet weaver. But his graying muzzle and labored steps weighed on Thomas, a reminder that even miracles have limits. It was a brisk November afternoon when Max returned from a rescue, his fur dusted with pine needles, his limp more pronounced than ever. Behind him trotted a young husky pup, barely 6 months old, with piercing blue eyes and a coat of silver and white. The pup's energy was boundless, her tail a blur as she bounded around Max, nipping playfully at his ears. Max, patient as ever, guided her to the clinic door, his gaze flicking to Thomas as if to say, "This one's important." "Another recruit, huh?" Thomas said, kneeling to greet the pup. She skittered back, then darted forward, licking his hand with a cautious enthusiasm. Max sat, his breathing heavy, and watched her with a quiet pride that Thomas hadn't seen before. Lily, sweeping the porch, gasped, "Oh, she's gorgeous, look at those eyes." They named her Luna for the way her coat shimmered like moonlight. She was healthy, if underfed, with no chip or collar, likely abandoned in the woods where Maxie had found her. Thomas and Lily fed her, cleaned her, and set up a bed beside Max's blanket. Luna, though, had other plans. She shadowed Max, mimicking his every move, sitting when he sat, tilting her head when he did, even following him on short walks around the clinic yard. When Max napped, Luna curled beside him, her small body pressed against his, as if absorbing his wisdom. "She's his shadow," Harold said, arriving with a crate of apples from his farm. He watched Luna trail Max to the water bowl, her steps a clumsy echo of his steady gait. "Think he's training her?" Thomas nodded, a slow realization dawning. "I think he's passing it on." He'd seen Max tire, his rescues growing. Less frequent, his rests longer. But Luna's arrival felt deliberate, like Max was choosing a successor, ensuring his work would endure. The thought both comforted and pained Thomas. Max was planning for a future he might not see. Luna's first test came a week later. Max stayed at the clinic, too weary to roam, his joints stiff from the cold. Luna, restless, pawed at the gate. Her ears pricked. Thomas hesitated, then opened it, watching as she bolted toward the park. "Be careful," he called, half expecting her to chase a squirrel and return empty-handed. Hours later she came back, her muzzle smeared with dirt, leading a rabbit caught in a fence, its paw bent but not broken. Luna sat proudly as Thomas freed the rabbit, her tail wagging like a metronome. "Good girl," Thomas said, his voice thick. He glanced at Max, who'd limped to the porch, his eyes fixed on Luna. Max's tail thumped once, a silent approval, and Thomas felt a lump in his throat. Luna wasn't just mimicking Max, she was learning, carrying his mission forward with her own spark. The town noticed. Locals stopping by to see Max now fawned over Luna, calling her Max's apprentice. A girl drew a picture of the two dogs, Max with a halo, Luna with a tiny crown, and taped it to the donation box. The clinic's scrapbook grew, with pages dedicated to Luna's rescues, a stray kitten, a limping beagle, each one guided by her boundless energy and uncanny instinct. Thomas marveled at her growth, but it was Max's quiet guidance that anchored her. When Luna hesitated with a skittish stray, Max would nudge her forward as if saying, "You've got this." Harold, sipping coffee on the porch one evening, watched Luna chase a leaf while Max rested nearby. "She's going to keep it going, ain't she?" he said, his voice soft. When he's done, Thomas's chest tightened. "Yeah, I think that's why he brought her." He looked at Max, whose eyes were half closed but watchful, and felt a mix of gratitude and grief. Max was building a legacy, not just for the town, but for Luna, ensuring the clinic remained a haven long after he was gone. The community embraced Luna's rise. At the Max's trail dedication, a small ceremony under the park's bare trees, Luna bounded beside Max as the mayor unveiled the plaque. Kids cheered, tossing treats, and Luna caught one mid-air, earning laughs. Max sat regally, his gaze steady, as if passing the torch in front of the town. A photographer snapped a shot. Max and Luna side by side, the trail stretching behind them. It ran in the local paper, captioned, "The Guide and His Heir." That night, Thomas sat by Max, Luna curled against him, her head on his paw. "You planned this, didn't you?" Thomas murmured, stroking Max's fur. "Making sure we're not alone." Max's tail wagged, slow and deliberate, and Thomas felt Clara's presence in the quiet, a warmth, a promise that love endures even through loss. Luna's soft snores filled the room, a reminder that Max's work would live on. But Thomas knew the next steps would test them all as Max's strength waned and Luna's role grew. Winter tightened its grip on Willow Creek, the air sharp with the promise of snow. The clinic, Max's haven, glowed warmly against the grey mornings, its walls a patchwork of photos, letters and drawings celebrating Max and his protégé, Luna. The town had embraced their mission, with Max's trail a symbol of hope and the donation box brimming with tokens of gratitude. Thomas felt the weight of Max's legacy in every rescued stray, every healed heart, but the golden retriever's fading strength cast a shadow. Max's steps were halting, his naps deeper, and Thomas knew each rescue might be his last. Still, Max's eyes burned with purpose, urging Thomas to trust the path they were on. It was a late December evening, the sky heavy with clouds, when Max stirred from his blanket by the clinic's heater. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if gathering strength for something vital. Thomas, charting at the desk, noticed the shift. Max's ears twitched, his gaze fixed on the door. "You're not going out in this, are you?" Thomas asked, glancing at the frost etching the windows. But Max stood, limping to the door, his tail giving a single resolute wag. Thomas grabbed his coat, his heart heavy with worry but steady with faith in Max's instinct. The cold bit through Thomas's gloves as he followed Max into the dusk. The dog moved with a quiet determination, his breath clouding in the frigid air, leading them past the park and toward the old mill road, a stretch of woods rarely traveled. Snowflakes began to fall, soft and silent, dusting Max's fur. His limp was pronounced, each step a labor, but he didn't falter. Thomas's boots crunched in the quiet, his mind flashing to Clara. How she'd loved snowy walks, Max bounding through drifts at her side. The memory steadied him, even as fear for Max grew. They reached an abandoned shed, its roof sagging under. Years of neglect. Max stopped, his ears pricked, and let out a low, urgent whine. Thomas's flashlight beam swept the shadows, landing on a pile of rotted boards. A faint whimper came from beneath. Thomas knelt, his hands numb as he shifted the wood, revealing a puppy, tiny, shivering, its black and tan fur matted with ice. The pup's eyes, barely open, blinked up at him, weak but alive. "Got you," Thomas whispered, scooping the puppy into his jacket. He turned to Max, who stood watching, his body trembling from exertion. "You did it, buddy." But as Max took a step, his legs buckled and he collapsed into the snow, his breathing shallow. Thomas's heart seized. He tucked the puppy tighter against his chest and knelt beside Max, his hands shaking as he checked the dog's pulse. It was faint, but steady. "Hold on," he murmured, tears stinging his eyes. "We're going home." Thomas carried Max. The puppy nestled inside his coat back to the clinic. The journey felt endless, snow falling thicker, each step heavy with dread and determination. At the clinic, Lily was waiting, her face paling as Thomas staggered in. "Doc, what happened?" She grabbed blankets, helping Thomas lay Max on the exam table. Thomas worked quickly, warming Max with towels, checking his vitals. The puppy, now in Lily's arms, whimpered softly, but Max was the priority. His eyes, though tired, met Thomas's, calm and trusting, as if saying, "I finished what I came for." They named the puppy Hope, a fragile ball of fur who took to a bottle with quiet determination. Thomas and Lily stayed through the night, monitoring. Max, whose breathing steadied but remained weak. Luna, sensing the shift, curled beside Max, her blue eyes wide and watchful. Harold arrived at dawn, his face etched with worry as he sat by Max, his hand resting on the dog's head. "You went all out, didn't you, Rusty?" he said, his voice breaking. Thomas watched Max, the weight of the night settling in. Max had given everything to find Hope, pushing past his limits to bring one more soul to safety. The clinic felt both full and empty, full of the lives Max had touched, empty with the looming possibility of his loss. Thomas thought of Clara, how she'd believed love was a cycle, always returning in new forms. Max had embodied that, from Sadie to Mia to Luna to Hope. And now, in this fragile moment, Thomas felt it too. By morning, Max stirred, lifting his head-to-nose Hope, who slept in a warmed crate nearby. His tail wagged, faint but deliberate, and Thomas exhaled, relief mingling with awe. "You're not done yet, are you?" he whispered. Max's eyes held his, a quiet promise that the journey wasn't over, but the cost was clear. Luna licked Max's muzzle, her presence a vow to carry on, and Thomas knew the next step would be the hardest, saying goodbye to Max while embracing the legacy he'd built. The first snow of January blanketed Willow Creek, softening the edges of the world and muffling the morning's quiet. Inside Max's haven, the clinic hummed with a gentle warmth, its walls a testament to the lives Max had touched, photos of rescued animals, letters of gratitude, and a child's drawing of a golden retriever with a halo. Thomas moved through the day with a heavy heart, his hands steady but his thoughts on Max. The golden retriever's final rescue, bringing hope to the clinic, had pushed him to his limits. Now, Max rested more, his breathing labored, his once vibrant energy a flicker. Thomas knew the end was near, but Max's legacy, carried by Luna and the town, burned bright. It was a Sunday morning, the air crisp and still, when Thomas found Max unmoving on his blanket by the heater. Luna lay beside him, her silver fur pressed against his golden coat, her blue eyes wide and solemn. Hope, the tiny puppy, nestled close, her soft whimpers the only sound in the room. Thomas knelt, his hand resting on Max's side, searching for a heartbeat. There was none. Max's eyes, always so full of purpose, were closed, his face peaceful, as if he'd known his work was done. Thomas's throat closed, tears spilling as he stroked Max's fur. "You did it, buddy," he whispered. "You brought us all home." Lily arrived minutes later, her gasp turning to quiet sobs as she joined Thomas. Harold followed, his boots heavy on the linoleum, his face crumpling as he saw Max. "He gave it all, didn't he?" Harold said, his voice rough. He sat beside Max, his hand on the dog's head, and for a long moment the three of them stayed there, honoring the dog who'd changed everything. Luna didn't move, her presence a steady anchor, while Hope's tiny warmth reminded them of Max's final gift. They wrapped Max in Clara's sunflower blanket, faded but soft, and carried him to the clinic's backyard, where a rosebush Clara had planted years ago stood bare against the snow. Thomas, Harold, and Lily dug together, the ground hard but yielding, each shovelful of farewell. Luna watched, her tail low, and when they lowered Max into the earth, she let out a soft whine, as if saying goodbye. Thomas placed Max's collar, worn and familiar, in the cedar box and whispered, "Thank you, Max, for everything." As they covered the grave, snow fell gently, blanketing the earth like a promise of rest. The clinic stayed closed that day, its porch light dim. Thomas expected grief to crush him, as it had after Clara's death, but this felt different, full, not hollow. Max had left behind more than loss. He'd left a legacy. Luna, now the clinic's guardian, patrolled the yard, her steps sure, her eyes sharp. Hope, growing stronger, tottered after her, already learning. The town, too, carried Max's spirit. Neighbors stopped by with flowers, notes, even a carved wooden paw print for the grave. One letter slipped into the donation box read, "Max found my son last year, lost in the woods. He showed us we're never alone. Thank you." Luna took up Max's mantle with a grace that stunned Thomas. Days after the burial, she slipped through the gate at dawn, returning with a shivering mutt, its fur tangled with burrs. Thomas, still raw, knelt to help, and Luna sat beside him, her gaze steady as if saying, "We keep going." Her rescues grew, cats, dogs, even a bird with a broken wing. Each one led to the clinic with the same purpose Max had shown. The town rallied, calling Luna Max's heir, leaving treats and toys labeled for her. A schoolgirl painted a sign for the clinic gate, "Luna's Light, inspired by Max." Harold, grieving but resolute, built a small bench by Max's grave, carved with his name. "For sittin' and rememberin'," he said, his eyes red but warm. He and Thomas sat there often, sipping coffee, watching Luna work. "Clara'd be proud," Harold said one evening, the sky streaked with pink. "Max started something and Luna's carrying it on." Thomas nodded, his hand on the bench's smooth wood. "It's more than the animals, it's us. He showed us how to see each other." He thought of Clara's paintings, how they found beauty in the overlooked, and saw Max and Luna doing the same, finding the lost, mending the broken, teaching Willow Creek to care. The clinic thrived, its rhythm unbroken. Lily updated the scrapbook, adding Luna's rescues beside Max's, a story of continuity. Locals adopted strays, inspired by Max's legacy, and the shelter's kennels stayed nearly empty. At the Max's trail ceremony, rescheduled to honor Max's passing, the mayor unveiled a second plaque, "In memory of Max, who showed us the way home." Luna stood beside Thomas, Hope at her side as the crowd clapped, their cheers soft with reverence. One snowy night, Thomas sat by the clinic window, Luna curled at his feet, Hope chewing a toy. A letter had arrived that day, no return address, with a photo of Clara and Max, young and joyful, On a beach Thomas recognized from their honeymoon. A note on the back in Clara's handwriting read, "Love doesn't end. It walks on new paws." Thomas held it, tears falling, and looked at Luna, whose eyes met his, bright and knowing. Max had brought him back to Clara, to himself, to a town that loved fiercely because of one dog's heart. Luna rose, nudging the door, and Thomas followed her outside. Snow fell, soft and silent, and Luna paused by Max's grave, her nose brushing the rosebush. Then she trotted to the gate, her tail high, ready for the next rescue. Thomas smiled, his heart full. Max was gone, but his love lived on, in Luna, in hope, in every life they'd touched. And as Luna led the way, Thomas knew the journey would continue, guided by the light Max had left behind.